Alright everyone, hello, and today we are going to talk about the Book of Enoch, what it is, what it's explaining, where it came from, and what to do about it. So the Book of Enoch is a really interesting book, and this here is my copy that has two introductions, one of which is by R.A. Gilbert, and then the new introduction by Lon Milo Duquette. Now, this book is so fascinating, but before we can get into it, I think we need to talk about who Enoch, this person, even is. By the way, if you want to see these videos 2 weeks earlier, consider subscribing to my Patreon, where you not only get all these videos, but also recipe cards, specific deity profiles, and lots of other interesting things to look at. Video tiers start at $10 a month, so definitely consider checking it out. So in the chapter of Genesis, very first chapter of the Bible, we have a whole lineage of people deriving from Adam, and one of these people is Enoch, who is the, I believe, grandfather or great-grandfather of Noah. Noah being the one who puts us all on the boat and, makes sure that humanity survives this gigantic 40-day flood or something, right? And we get a little bit of a reference to the cause of this flood in Genesis 6, like at the tippy top, right? So here we go, chapter 6, Genesis. When men began to increase on earth and daughters were born to them, the divine beings saw how beautiful the daughters of men were and took wives from among those that pleased them. The Lord said, My breath shall not abide in man forever, since he too is flesh. Let the days allowed to him be 120 years. It was then, and later too, that the Nephilim appeared on earth, when the divine beings cohabitated with the daughters of men, who bore them offspring. They were the heroes of old, the men of renown. The Lord saw how great man's wickedness on earth, and how every plan devised in his mind was nothing but evil all the time. And the Lord regretted that he had made man on earth, and his heart was saddened. The Lord said, I will blot out from the earth the men whom I created, men together with beasts, creeping things, and birds of the sky, for I regret that I made them. But Noah found favor with the Lord. And so it goes on about how the world was corrupt and filled with lawlessness and all these other kinds of things, and a lot of that lawlessness comes from this issue of the Nephilim, or the giants, right? These big giants that were a direct consequence of angels taking up human women as wives. So really what we can say is that the Book of Enoch kind of just, I guess, expands on that entire story, and this is where we get a lot of our ideas of, the war between God and the devil, and like all the fallen angels and the Watchers and all of these other interesting things. We get a little bit of an explanation as to where things like magic or metalworking or makeup even came from. It just kind of perfectly slips into that one chapter that otherwise doesn't have like a lot of context really going for it. This adds a lot more to that story. However, of course, this is considered apocrypha, which means that it's not considered like provable to be actual scripture or inspired by God, and so it's kind of tossed out of the Bible a lot, except for in the Ethiopian Bible. However, did you know that there's actually 3 versions of the Book of Enoch? There is the Ethiopian one, which is the one that I've got right here, the standard one that we would call Book of Enoch. There's also the Old Slavonic Book of Enoch, which only appears in the Old Church Slavonic Bible. And then there's a third Book of Enoch, which is just kind of written by a Jewish rabbi, I believe in the 5th century or so, that combines both 1 and 2 into something a little bit more cohesive. Although obviously dates and things like that, or when things were actually written, are a little up for debate. But the thing about the Book of Enoch is that it is attributed to Enoch, right? Much the way that, say, Deuteronomy is attributed to Moses, but it honestly probably has a bunch of different writers all throughout time. But anyway, back to who Enoch is. So as he is, one of the ancestors of Noah, in this story, and even in the Bible as well, the actual story of Genesis, it mentions that Enoch never died. He never actually, closed his eyes for good, laid down, and disappeared into the dirt. God actually took him up, right? Took him up in a way, into heaven. And as Paul would describe it, God translated him into heaven. So he never actually got to die. And it is actually considered in a lot of, especially Jewish mysticism and Christian mysticism, and it's especially considered in a lot of Jewish mysticism that Enoch became the angel Metatron, and he is one of the 2 people to ever become angels, the other one being the prophet Elijah, who became the angel Sandalphon. So right off the bat, we got a lot going on with this book. This book is really incredible. It tells a lot of interesting things. It tells us about the angels. So right in the beginning, it mentions Michael, Uriel, Raphael, and Gabriel, who looked down from the heaven and saw much blood being shed upon the earth, right? Because, you know, in the very beginning of the story, we have angels like Semyaza, you know, as Azazel and all the others. They go down and they take up these women as their own wives, and they teach them a bunch of things. They are the ones, according to the Book of Enoch, who taught how to do rituals with root work, who taught how to, you know, beautify the eyelids, like as in makeup. They taught us metalworking, and the metalworking, ironically, was the thing that really kind of screws up, because people, instead of having, you know, sticks and stones, they suddenly had very sharp, lighter, more maneuverable and ergonomic tools with which to stab each other. And so these 4 archangels that are mentioned by name in here look down upon the earth and they say, oh no, we're in trouble and this is bad. And they tell God, and God says, wow, I can't believe that happened, to the fire pit with all of them. And so that's kind of the extra, I don't know, stuff that got cut on the cutting room floor here in Genesis 6, I guess, if you could say. It's probably just a collection of other stories that people did come up with to kind of fill in the gaps of why these Nephilim came here, why they existed, how they existed, what they were doing. Likely it's to explain these kinds of things, you know, in folklore and other things, but it has been used as a very magical tool for a long, long time. And in fact, I'm going to read you a little bit of the words of Lon Melo Duquette, because he has a lot of really interesting things to say about this book as an esoteric and mystical source. So I'm going to jump around a bit, but he essentially says, like, discovering rational esoteric meanings to irrational scriptural literature has occupied Jewish, Christian, Islamic, and Hermetic scholars and mystics for centuries, and it is in this capacity that the Book of Enoch the Prophet intrigues the tiny segment of spiritual artisans who are bold or incautious enough to identify themselves as magicians. And he's also making the case that things like the Book of Enoch are pretty wild and pretty difficult to understand because they're not meant to be in the hands of just anybody. They're not meant to be understood or used or just plainly read by the common folk who have nothing to do with esotericism or magic systems. He says, how many times have you tried to wade into Genesis or Ezekiel and finally just gave up and said, what the hell are these guys talking about? Don't feel bad. You weren't meant to know what they're talking about, not unless you held vital interpretive keys. And one of the magicians that was in charge of kind of figuring out what was going on, and by in charge of, I mean he made it his mission, was actually Dr. John Dee, who was a 16th century astrologer, mathematician, occultist, and alchemist who directly advised Queen Elizabeth I in England. Dr. John Dee was the one that we can, credit with coming up with the Enochian language, right? This language of angels that he says was directly revealed to him by the angels themselves. And it's through that Enochian system that he found a way to directly work with angels, and, kind of work through a lot of the things that ceremonial magicians tend to work through, like seeing God, finding God, attaining one's higher self, all through these concepts of angel magic that he derived from serious, careful study of the Book of Enoch. And this foundation that John Dee set down in the 16th to very early 17th century would then go on to inform other kinds of ceremonial magicians, like those of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, even those like Aleister Crowley, anyone else who was really into that occult, esoteric thing at the time. Because remember, occultism does not mean... It does not mean all the spooky, weird junk you see in Hollywood. Occult literally just means hidden. It means it's not plainly available and not plainly understood. So knowing that kind of helps you understand that, yeah, occultism was very much about that mysticism, finding these little codes and little keys in the scriptures that otherwise people wouldn't really, pick up on. For anyone who's seen Full Metal Alchemist, if you know the parts where they're finding an alchemist's, notes about alchemy, but it's written as a cookbook, same idea, right? For anyone looking at it, it just looks like a simple recipe book, but when you decode it, you end up getting some really intense alchemical theory and application of, like, how to make philosopher's stones. Which is not at all what the recipe about, like, raspberry cookies or something was going on about. Likewise, a lot of these philosophers, occultists, and magicians, they had this idea that scriptures like the Book of Enoch and other such things worked much in the same way. This is kind of what informs Jewish Kabbalah and the entire concept of the Zohar, which is that more mystical read and analysis of the Torah and the other books of the Bible. Though, of course, there are going to be people, as Duquette points out, that say that Enoch has nothing to do with all of this magical and occultism, right? One person, Gilbert, I believe, that Duquette quotes, says that, it should be emphasized that nothing in Enochian magic, whether of D. Crowley or anyone else, has the slightest connection with the content, purpose, and meaning of the Book of Enoch. Again, right? They looked at it and they said, there is something hidden here, there's some kind of code here, and I'm going to crack it, and that's how we ended up getting a lot of very interesting ceremonial magic ideas. And Duquette says, this is not to say that the text is without value from a magical perspective, but like the magician's wand, or sword, or cup, or disc, or robe, or crown, or ring, it is an impotent, inert, and worthless object unless the magician's art brings it to life as a tool in his or her magical arsenal of weapon. For the practicing magician who is prepared to do so, the text, especially those sections which deal with the hierarchies of angels and demons and the organization and structure of heaven and earth, provides intriguing possibilities. And those kinds of possibilities are the things that become, Kabbalah and other such mysticism. They become the, spheres of goetic magic or anything else like that. These are the things that help us understand, these more mystical applications of Christian, Jewish, Islamic, and other such occult mystic philosophies. Without stuff like this, and people like John Dee, who literally would sleep 4 hours, get right back up and start studying again, all this kinds of stuff, we wouldn't have even a concept of these kinds of things, right? It's from philosophy that magic develops. And one of the biggest things to understand is that the Book of Enoch, yes, there is some literal elements when you engage with a spirit like Azazel. Yes, the face value things in this story absolutely did, inform his being and how he responds when you interact to him, and the history that he is operating from. But a lot of this is also metaphorical. This has a lot to do with, explaining broader ideas or having symbols of things, allegories, other kinds of literary devices to explain different contexts, different things going on. I've heard some people say that this is actually talking about the Seleucid Empire's encroachment on Israel. I've heard that people say that, this is just a bunch of stuff about the general construction of the heavens and has nothing to do with angels at all. It entirely depends on who wrote it, but unfortunately we don't know who and how many people actually wrote this or what they intended this to be about. And I love the way Duquette ends this, right? Perhaps this book will be for you only another inscrutable mystical treatise written in a long-forgotten code by long-forgotten mystics or other long-forgotten mystics, an attractive, colorful, and unread addition to our esoteric library. On the other hand, you may discover within its pages, or even between the lines of text, the very magical secret of life that magicians for ages have dreamed they would find in the elusive lost Book of Enoch. And that's important. Between the lines of text. This is something that, while the Book of Enoch is very interesting, it is just one piece of the entire Bible. You could literally do this with this entire thing, and that's what Jewish mystics did, right? They took this entire Bible and they ran through it and they tried to read between the lines. They tried to find codes, in the first letters. They tried to kind of connect the Hebrew letters to numbers and see what kind of came out in it and like what patterns they could draw. This is what happened. And this is what they spent so much time doing, to try and figure out these hidden meanings, like the alchemy's cookbook. And try to find these hidden meanings like the alchemist's cookbook, right? So you can take this approach with everything, with every single thing. And by that, you can probably discover some pretty interesting things in how you might look at and interact with God. But at its face value standard, the Book of Enoch is literally the story of the prophet Enoch, who was one of the ancestors of Noah, one of the ones who recorded how these angels came down to heaven, took up human wives, had these horrible giant children who ended up teaching us all kinds of terrible things and leading us down a path to ruin as we were all stabbing each other, and why God flooded the world to get rid of them. It also deals with, where all these fallen angels are going after, right? It talks about how Michael kind of boots them all out and chains them up and throws them down into, the deep pits of the earth. It talks about what's going to happen to them in the end days. It talks about, all this kind of rebellion and all these other things. It's so wild, because a lot of these, traditional ideas in Christian psyche, the war between God and the devil and all that stuff, it was in this. And this was removed from most Bibles except the Ethiopian one, and was lost for a long time and wasn't rediscovered or put into English until just the past few centuries. So, as an example, right, this is from the final judgment of Azazel, the Watchers, and their children. And this is God speaking to Enoch, and Enoch's just kind of sitting there getting all this beamed into his brain. When it says, "When I have desired to take hold of them by the hand of the angels on the day of tribulation and pain because of, them doing what they did, I will cause my chastisement and my wrath to abide upon them, saith God, the Lord of spirits. Ye mighty kings who dwell on the earth, ye shall have to behold mine elect one, how he sits on the throne of glory and judges Azazel, and all his associates, and all his hosts, in the name of the Lord of spirits." And then Enoch says, and then I saw there the hosts of the angels of punishment going, and they held scourges and chains of iron and bronze, and I asked the angel of peace who went with me, saying, "To whom are these who hold the scourges going?" And he said unto me, "To their elect and beloved ones, that they may be cast into the chasms of the abyss of the valley. And then that valley shall be filled with their elect and beloved, and the days of their lives shall be at an end, and the days of their leading astray shall not thenceforth be reckoned." A little bit of a King James-ish kind of language, but as you can see, it's literally just a vision, right? It's Enoch describing these visions, things that he saw because the fallen angels ask him to, ask for God's forgiveness for them. Basically, they ask Enoch to intercede for them, and God says, well, first of all, they shouldn't be asking a human to do that, but second of all, screw them in particular for doing what they did, right? So that's kind of like the point of this whole thing. If you want a copy of it yourself, you can absolutely just find it for free online, because it's the Book of Enoch, is public domain, just like, the Bible is. But this specific one I actually found in the Witch Talk section of Barnes & Noble, so you can find it there. But this is a wonderful edition. I love the introductions to it, and I think that, yeah, it's a really interesting, addition to your esoteric library as a Christian witch, and especially if you want to dive into all of the more ceremonial magic things that actually informed today's witchcraft. Go ahead and look up where Gerald Gardner of Wicca got a lot of his ceremonial magic ideas from. Just go ahead. But with all that said, that is, just some context on the Book of Enoch, who Enoch is, where this story fits into the Bible, and how it's an extrapolation on that story, and how people have used it by kind of picking it up and reading it sideways and up and down and all around to get some really interesting ideas about magical philosophy and the character of God. Again, it's a lot, but this is why Jesus spoke in parables. This is why you can't just say the Bible's clear, because a lot of this stuff is extremely esoteric. Even the Apocrypha, especially the Apocrypha. So with all that said, I will see you guys next week for a little bit more Saint talk, and I hope you guys have a great rest of your week.